tonight, and he is a wealth of information. He's also got a bio that's like this. So I don't want to, this. He's been doing this for a little while and does incredible work. So excuse me while I read a little bit, because I don't want to misspeak. So Rob's a professor of biobehavioral health at Penn State, and he's affiliated with the Edna Bennett Pierce Prevention Research Center. He's been doing this kind of research for nearly 35 years. So the man knows what he's talking about at this point. Initially, he was looking at methods for reducing drunk driving. It's a subject he is incredibly passionate about and continues to learn about on a regular basis. His research includes externally funded studies on brief parent interventions, substance abuse prevention, and skin cancer prevention. His works have been acknowledged by several organizations and national publications, including the Surgeon General's report. He's been the recipient of the Prevention Research Award from the Society for Prevention Research, the Faculty Scholar Medal from Penn State, and the Ralph Higson Prevention Scientist Researcher of the Year Award. You see why I'm reading all this? He serves on the Child Endangerment Expert Panel for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. He's a very active mentor and reviewer. All of his doctoral students, since he joined the faculty at Penn State, have received NIH F31 training fellowships. He's been a standing member or an ad hoc member of NIH grant review studies since 1988, and he regularly evaluates articles submitted to scientific journals. As an active researcher in drunk driving and substance abuse prevention topics, he's been interviewed on NBC Dateline, Good Morning America, and CBS Health Watch, as well as featured in USA Today. A little bit off the topic, he's a lifetime member of Trout Unlimited, and when he's not researching, he can be found out fly fishing. So please help me about doing that.
Thank you, Judy. So Zach, this is a little loud for me. Can we just turn this down a little bit? Is this any better? Is this better for you? Because I don't want to shout. Is that better? Okay, cool. All right. So thank you, Judy. That was a really nice introduction. I always think they're talking about somebody else when I hear that. And I know there are students here. So every once in a while I have a high school student who asks me, he writes me an email, she writes me an email, and they say, Rob, will you, well, they say Dr. Teresa, but I'm calling her. They say, Rob, will you be my mentor for my high school senior project? And I always say yes. Right? But don't tell your friends. I don't want 50 or 60 at a time. I do say yes, because everybody needs somebody to care about what they do. And so I say yes. And then I had recently did this for a student who's a really good writer, and he's just a really neat kid. And I like it. I know that you don't feel like your kids, but he's a really good kid. Afterwards, he sent me a letter and said, I'm really nervous to meet you and have a professor on stage even talk to me. And I said, well, thanks for sharing. I wouldn't have known that. And the truth is, you didn't show it. You looked actually like a really wonderful person that's welcome in my home anytime. So if you're in State College, you come over, I'll make you dinner. You tell me what you want. And to help you in the future, whenever you meet like a professor or somebody else that you really respect, or a celebrity or anything like that, think this as soon as you meet them. When they go to a grocery store, they can't find everything either, and they need somebody to help them. And he goes, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to think that now from now on. And I was at Madison Square Garden last night, and I was with a friend of mine, and we ran into a couple of people, and one of the people was like a celebrity kind of person, and I instantly thought, yeah, he probably can't find everything in the grocery store. And so, they were all right, so that being the case, that's a really nice introduction, but I can't find my way around the grocery store most of the time, and I have to look for things. And they always say, did you find everything? And I go, yeah, sure I did, but I was lying, because I really didn't find it. The other thing here is that I teach classes. And of course, I've been fortunate to have really great people to work with and learn from and do all these things. But I teach classes. And so I will ask the same thing of you that I ask my students when I show up to give a lecture. Give me 5 minutes. If in 5 minutes I haven't made it interesting in you, do whatever you want. But at least give me 5 minutes of your undivided attention. That's what I ask them. Because here's the way they think, and your students. And at some point, you very well may be at Penn State or someplace else. If I come here and I'm interesting for that hour, then it is a good hour of your time. If I come here and I'm not interesting for that hour, then it wasn't a good hour of your time. So when I lecture and I'm doing my class, they don't really care that I've gotten awards from NIH. They don't care if I was Research of the Year. They don't, I mean, they care a little because they don't want to have somebody teaching that class that's not capable of doing it. But what they really care about is this going to be worth my time right now? So if I don't do a good job, I better do a great job in the next lecture. And what I really do is I try to be in the moment, try to be there, and make whatever it is that I'm doing at that point the most important thing in the moment. So right now, this is the most important part of my day. Okay? Better than the dinner I had before, which was fantastic. But this is the most important thing. So give me 5 minutes. If it's not interesting, if you want, get on your phone. Do whatever you normally do when you're bored. Okay? Sound good? Fair enough? All right, great. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is a few different things. I want to share with you my observations about this, and if you have questions, feel free to ask me at any time. All right? I may delay my answer for a little bit, so I might say, that's a really good question, can I come back to that? And if I say that, that doesn't mean that I don't think it was a good question. It means that I really do want to come back to it. And then after I try to answer it, I'll say, did I do a good job? And then it's up to you to tell me yes, no, what, no, all right? Because sometimes you don't do it. I will always repeat back your question to everybody else because what I've learned is anybody that's sitting behind you probably won't hear your question. And so I'll try to engage everybody in the Q&A. All right? All right, so with that in mind, there'll be another thing that I want to just frame here just before I start this talk. And that is that there'll be times where I'll say, this is what I think. And what you're hearing then is, this is what my experience is, I'm sharing that with you. But other times I'll say the data show, or the science shows, or studies show. That's now not my opinion. That's the data, and that means it's something we can all look at and make decisions about. Okay, whether we like the data or not, that's up to us. But we can't change the data, and the data are what drives you if you're a scientist. So typically, when you go see a doctor, or you go see a clinician like myself, we're going to have opinions, but we're also going to interpret the data. And the data is pretty much going to be the same thing in most cases. It's not like one person can interpret differently. So if I say, this leads to higher risk, it's not necessarily my opinion. It's the data that show that. All right? Just so that we get it. And if you have any questions about that, you can say, great. I'm not going to cover it like it's a stat class or anything like that. But on occasion, I'm going to want to highlight it so that we all understand why I feel the way I feel, or why you might want to feel the way you feel. All right? The other thing is that I'm from New York, and even though I've lived in different places, I have a little New Yorkness to me. And so sometimes I'll give you a face that will look like I'm from New York, but what I'm really doing is I'm thinking. All right? So there's really no question I'm going to go, oh, that's a horrible question. If it is, I'll say, oh, that's a horrible question, because I'm from New York, and that's kind of how you're going to get what you think. But most of the time, I'll scrunch, I might do this. In fact, I might even react initially, just because I'm a person. That's what we do. All right? Sound good? Cool. Thanks. All right. So the topic that I'm talking about today is about parents and what parents can do. And that's because I'm really interested in parents. Of all the things I could really study, parents are really neat because they, in a way, have the keys to the car to your lives, the next generation. And when I'm sitting in front of a class now, because I'm in my 60s, right, I'm on the back nine of my scientific career at best. All right, maybe I'm even, adding a little to that. You're the future. Really, you're the ones who are going to be in charge of what we get to do, good or bad, going forward. Parents are the people who help you get to that. place. And so for me, parents are they're really cool. When I was figuring out what I wanted to study, I was getting trained to do behavioral decision making. And I got to thought, what am I going to apply this to so it's really meaningful? And as a student, I had different jobs. I worked as a specialist for autistic children. I worked in an alcohol rehab center where my job was to do the initial intake and screening and determine which direction the treatment plan might go. And so quite often, and it used to be that my shifts initially were from 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. And most often I was sitting at a desk and a police officer would walk in with somebody in cuffs. And usually it was a scenario where somebody got in trouble with the law for some reason and they would bring them to me. And as you can see, I'm really big and I have a bulky, imposing presence. And so usually what I'd say is I'd say something like to the police officer, I'd say, can you remove the cuffs and actually step out of the room? And they would look at me like I had a third eye in the middle of my forehead, like, you really want to do this? I just pulled this guy from a bar fight where he was throwing cars. And you want to just sit across from him without cuffs on? And I said, yeah, because I can't really be successful if he's cuffed up. Unless, of course, you put cuffs on him. And he said, I can do that. I said, no, I prefer you take them off and have him step outside. But I did something just before that happened. So as he or she was about to uncuff somebody that was literally in a violent situation because of alcohol, I said, hold on, sorry, I forgot to ask a question. And the question I asked was, you're not going to make me regret taking these cuffs off, right? And you have to answer, there's only one right answer, because if you answer it wrong, then you can't help it. And more often than not, the person said, no, I'm not going to make you regret it, so I take your cuffs off. And I would begin my session. So that's how it started. Think about being successful under these circumstances. The other thing is, usually when I come in and I give a talk, I'm giving a talk because either people want to prevent harm and tragedy, or they've experienced harm and tragedy, and they want me to come in and potentially help and create hope for the next few days. And so those experiences have shaped some thinking I have. So the first thing is I do work with parents. But everything I do with parents is brief, and much less time than I just spent introducing myself. So we have an intervention right now that's going on nationally, and it takes 12 minutes. And for some people, 12 minutes is way too long that they can give to me as a psychologist. In their lives, their families, things that are going on. When I did medical physician interventions, I had less than 2 minutes. Because the doctors were like, that's all we can give you in this office visit. And even that, we're giving you a lot. And I was trying to prevent cancer. And they had 2 minutes at most per patient. The good news is we figured out how to do this intervention, not the one I'm going to talk about today, but that one in 30 seconds. And it's being used around the country now to help prevent cancer. So our goal is to really try to do brief things. And my goal is to try and do the most I could possibly do, reach the most people I possibly can reach in the least amount of time. And if I started and I told you that that was my goal and that I was going to be successful at that, you'd probably look at me and go, good luck. Because the truth would be that would be about how most people respond. All right, Zach, I hope this really works. All right, look at that. Okay. So I'm going to go through some slides. These are placeholders for me, so I'm going to go through some quicker than others. This is the world I live in. Okay, it's not necessarily worlds that you live in, but this is the world I live in. Penn State is no different than many major universities in our country. It's just larger in scale. And when I first got to Penn State, I wanted to do a ride-along with the police at night on a weekend night to find out what life is like from their perspective, from the standpoint of drinking. So he asked me, what night do I want to go? I said, please, please, please do not pick a football weekend night. And I said, no, I'm probably not because I'm going to be at the game, so I really don't want to do the ride-along with you. Can I do Halloween night? And they said, you really are something, aren't you? And I said, yeah, because I really want want to see what it's like. So I want to see what it's like under the circumstances. And so where I live, and I visit other campuses all the time, and sometimes I go to high schools and do things like that. This is the world I live in. All right? The second world that I live in is the scientific world. And these are the medical journals and the behavioral science journals that when I do my work, I live to those standards. And so that's where I publish the works. The things I'm going to share with you have been not only vetted prior to getting the funding, but they've been vetted prior to becoming what we call evidence that makes a difference in people's lives. And these are the alcohol world journals that I live in. And then somewhere along the way, I started working with the cancer field, so we added to those places, so we have to do the same thing. And I learned from each one, because each one's a little different, but we're people at the end of the day. So some of the dimensions that help us reduce our harm as a result of alcohol and other drugs are similar things that we do to try and stay healthy and not develop cancer. Of which alcohol is one of the things that's a risk factor for cancer. So even though we're young, we might not notice that, but at the time, it breaks down our body's immune systems. All right, so with that, when I started my careers with adults, mostly adults, like I just talked about. And then I wanted to work with parents. Then I wanted to work with teenagers. And in the scientific term, we call it adolescents. But that's what I really wanted to work with, parents and teens. And the reason I wanted to work with parents and teens is I wanted to prevent the harm and prevent the tragedy that I was dealing with when police officers would bring people in, whose lives were pretty much becoming untenable. Right? They were becoming difficult to live. So this is what my colleagues and friends told me when I told them I'm going to switch and I'm going to be working with parents. That won't work. Okay? Remember, reach the most people, change the most behavior in the least amount of time. That won't work. That might be the worst idea I've ever heard. Okay? You have a nice career going. Why would you want to mess it up? All right? My parents, they taught me how to survive. They taught me how to be stubborn and believe in things that I thought may not be possible. All right? They could have been wrong. And now that I've thought about this a lot, they were probably wrong at times because we're people. But I didn't give up. And I didn't think it was a bad idea. I collected data. I used a scientific approach. I had questions I want to know the answers to, and collected data. And I saw whether or not those questions could be answered with the data. And so when we talk about science, not that I want to give a science class, that's as simple as it is. I have a question I don't know the answer to. Why don't I find out? And do a study to answer that question. And that is what I did. So, fast forward 30 years. And I noticed, I did this last night, I got 210 million hits on college student drinking in 2.3 seconds. I love Google because it'll tell you anything you need to know in 2.3 seconds. If you Google, you guys Google, click things. Do you ever look at how much time it takes to give you the number of hits? Go look. It usually takes about 2.3 seconds to cover all of the database and you'll give you information. It's insane. All right? When I started doing this work, there was no Google to do that. Okay? By the way, I'll date myself. There were typewriters. You know, have you ever used a typewriter?
No, sir.
What? Typewriters. You gotta do that, man. Go to an antique store and just start telling these kids. All right, 34 million hits on college student drinking prevention. So there's more hits on college student drinking than there are on health prevention. And there are 84 million hits on parent-based college drinking interventions, which is up from 50 million a few years ago and 0 when I started doing this work. There was no one who was interested in when I was there. The reason why is I was interested in can parents make a difference, plus when students turn 18. Do they really matter when students turn 18? No one would argue to value parents for people that are maybe in K through 12. Right? But then the question is, once they turn 18, do parents make a difference? And if so, what would that difference look like in a positive way? What would the difference look like in a negative way? And with that, I'll say, thank you very much for your time, and I don't, right? I don't answer that question. That would probably not be so good. I don't answer that question. And so, for me, this is what I've been doing for 30 plus years. I've been asking questions about, can we make this better? Can we do things? And I'd like to say that we've solved all these problems, and we haven't. I can guarantee you. But we have made amazing advances. I met my wife in college, in the first year of college. We got married, 7 years later. But at the time, we were young and trying to figure things out. And I was moving into this career of being a clinician and doing this work. And I said, I've got a goal here. And my goal is to try and solve this problem by the time I'm in my mid-40s and go back to being a fly fishing guide. Are you okay with it? And she said, yeah, sure. Okay, because that's pretty much what she does. She says, yeah, sure. Okay, and you can't believe the disappointment I had when I was in my mid-40s and I had not yet solved the problem of answering all the questions I had, and I had to postpone my fly fishing guide experience until later. By the way, I am a fly fishing guide, and so I'm certified. But I have not left my psychologist hat and put on my fly fishing guide full time. All right, so with that, I want to talk about these trials. 15 years of clinical trials. All right, 15 years. Just what you think right now. Go back 15 years ago. What were you doing? What were you doing 15 years ago?
Not born yet.
Not born yet. Were you an idea?
I was on the way.
What were you doing 15 years ago?
Probably eating something up.
I don't doubt that. That's definitely, you could see that. Okay, what were you doing 15 years ago?
Crawling around.
Okay, yeah. So you're very different, except for the eating part. I'm pretty sure that statement's consistent. That's how different you're going to be in 15 years from now. Right? And that's what our trials look like. When they first started, they were very simple, and now they're very complicated. And our goal is incrementally moving closer and closer and closer to my end goal, which is as brief as possibly can be, reaching the most people and having maximum impact. Just remember that. That's like a really important part of this. All right, I'll go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. But we can see it. This is the science. These are the kind of questions. And it all starts with a question: will this work? And so the first questions were: if we create a parent intervention that's really brief, will it work? Most interventions for parents take place in schools just like this. And they take place at night, just like this. And they take place over the course of several hours, multiple sessions, weeks. So there's a program called Strengthening Families. In a way, Strengthening Families is like the gold standard. And typically there's like 16 different chapters or curricula, so that means 16 different weeks of information, several hours a week. People are to be trained to deliver it. They have to be supervised to make sure it's delivered the same way from school to school to school to school, and so on. I want to give them 15 minutes. They have 16 plus weeks, hours and hours and hours. Right? Okay. So, will it work? Can we build it? Will it work? And then the question is, will it work for the highest risk audiences? Why does it work? And does it work differently for different people? And these have been the base of the questions that we want to know. Like, here's the hint. I'll fast forward really quickly. It does work, right? Otherwise I wouldn't be here. And I would have gotten a Surgeon John to say, this is one of the 2 efficacious interventions in our country. This is it. This is the only one of its kind for families. So it does work. Why does it work? I'll tell you all about it. And then, does it work the same across all families? The answer is no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. But it works really good for everyone. Then it works better for some than others. Okay, and that's really important to know. All right. So, steps. How do you get to that place where you get to do this? don't know if this is gonna work. It's either I'm gonna press this button. I've been trying not to press this button because anything can happen. Zach, this red button, is that the laser pointer?
It is.
Yeah, see, I think it's just gonna shut the computer down and I have to leave because it's dark and it's listening time. Oh, look at that, laser pointer. Can you see that? It starts with the science base that exists before I got here. And so there's all these studies, there's a couple by me, that get at this idea of why do students drink? Why do they even want to drink? What are the reasons why? What happens after they drink? So I can ask you these questions, and you can answer because you're based upon what you think. But this is based upon study after study after study. And most of the time for us, we want to do these studies here in the US, we want to do them in Europe, and we want to do them in Australia. Those are the three places where we do these work. We want to do it in multiple sites within the US because we're a little different in every region of our country. Okay? Young people wherever they are. Parents are parents wherever they are. Young people want to experience different things, and parents want their kids to be happy and healthy. But it varies from place to place. All right? So it starts with that. And this is the information base that's out there. And these are just a sample of articles. There's really hundreds of them. And then the first thing you do is you have to take that information, answer as many questions from that, and build something that's not yet been tested or published. So this was the proof of concept. And you notice there's no colors, there's no pictures, there's nothing. That's it. Blue, gray, really drab. It was the early version. It was the version 1.0. Right? So it was really pretty harsh. And we ran a study. And I did this at Boise State University. So for those of you who are football fans, it's the blue turf place. But if they're not, it's out west. And I ran a study, and they asked the people that were coordinating the orientation if I could have access to families. And they said, just as long as you don't talk about drinking. And I said, I won't talk about drinking at all. But that's what I want to do. So what I do is I gave 50% of the families I work with these materials. And then the other group, we call them the control group, because I didn't give them anything. And I said, read this. I'm going to ask you questions about this. And then afterwards, I want to know, I'm going to ask you your sons and daughters questions. What I really want to know is, if they read it, would they read the whole thing? If they read it, would they have any parts that they didn't like? If they read it, what could they tell us to make it better? If they read it, so I want to know a lot about will the parents actually read it. Okay? That was the first step. Then the second step was I wanted parents to talk to their sons and daughters about the content of that information. Now, when I would ask my students, do your parents talk to you in the early days of this? Most of them would say, no, they don't really talk at all. They don't really talk about this. What do you do? Well, they feed us. And then what do you do? They tell us we need to work on it. And then what do you do? And so, they really didn't talk about those topics. And through the years, I'd ask those same questions, and more kids would be answering yes, they do, yes, they do, yes, they do. So do your parents talk to you? He's still there, right?
Yeah.
You do. So, do your parents talk to you?
Yeah.
Your parents talk to you? They talk to you? Yep. Do they talk too much to you? Thought I was going to ask you the same question. Yeah, well, anyway, so here's what happens. People do in fact talk to their sons and daughters way more now than they were. In fact, when kids live hours and hours away from them on campus, they talk to them on average through some form of connection with their phones or social media messaging, something, Instagram, several times a day, which is not common. For many of the people that are my age or slightly younger, we had one phone, it was in the middle of the hall, at a dorm, and we talked to our parents pretty much once a week. And now people talk a lot more. Anyway, so the proof of concept, we'll talk about what happened here. Then we translated that into what's available now, which is what we call, parent notice there's different pictures and colors. And then there's a version that I did for the Mothers Against Drunk Driving organization. There's actually several versions. They're going national, and they reach a new family every 10 to 15 minutes. And that's been going on for 12 years now, so that's a lot of families. Right? And we tested, would it work in these environments of real world settings? Again, sampling, having matched controls. And then the idea is getting the word out. And so the cool part about this is we are in every state. We're in most counties and most communities, either through the handbook or the man materials. We're in most countries, which is just simply amazing in the days where we were back here trying to figure things out. So let's talk a little bit about this. High pressure in youth. Okay, first off, the first reason is that we know that students drink a lot at different ages. The alcohol's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. That means everywhere. Okay? So everywhere we turn, we live in a very alcohol-based society. Here, Europe, Australia. Okay? And so we know that people use alcohol for special occasions. They use it to celebrate. They use it to get at gatherings. They use it to play games. You know, alcohol is very much out there. All right? The second is peers, friends. When people think of alcohol, especially parents when they think of alcohol, they think about friends. Friends. Peers. Peers are going to influence people. All right? It's always the peers. So it's not you, it's your friend. Right? It's not you, it's your peers. Peers influences. Peers do influences. But they don't only influence us, they influence us as adults. So in other words, we have social circles too. We have adult friends and peers that influence the decisions that we make too. Whether it's positive or negative. Everybody has a social one. And so peers are important. The other one is elevated availability, increased opportunities. So, quick show of hands. Who's here has been around other people that have been drinking? Yeah, increased availability and opportunities, right? They're everywhere. The more, the worse. So, Penn State, for example. And I shared this with AJ a little earlier. Penn State, one of the biggest campuses in the country. It really is. It's enormous. It's like Disney World for college students. It's just really vast. Some people don't like it. Some people like smaller schools. You might be thinking about schools in the future, right? Penn State's a great place, and I'm not here to advertise for it, but I'm also not here to talk you out of it. It's an amazing place with amazing people and amazing opportunities for students. Anybody here Penn State grad? Want to know a Penn State grad? Okay, cool. All right. Anyway, I'm going to use it as an example. There are two streets that run alongside of the main campus, University Park and State College. One's called College Ave, surprise, surprise, and another one's called Beaver Ave, and it's named after our first president of the university, President Great Beaver. So one goes north and south, and the other goes east and west, and that's really what we have. If you walk from one side of the street to the end of that street that borders our campus, those two streets, I should say, there's 60 different fraternity houses. 60. There's only one sorority house because Pennsylvania has a law. Don't kill the messenger. Pennsylvania has a law that no more than 4 unmarried women should house together. We were in the original 13 colonies. We want to stay that way, but they have a law that they don't want women to live together in a house when there's more than 4 people. I don't know that the law is ever enforced, but that means sororities don't have houses, but fraternities do. Sororities have floors of dorms, all right, that you left. Why is that? Why can't we move that in Pennsylvania?
Why not?
Why, yeah, why?
Well, unfortunately, it's considered wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I learned that and I went, really? Seriously? I had that one, really? Seriously? But that's it. But they've changed that law. And so there now is the first sorority house that's now among the 60 fraternity houses. So I suspect that's going to grow. They're going to move out of the dorms, they're going to be in houses, they're going to do this. These are amazing structures. They really are. They're gorgeous, and they put on these light shows at Christmas time and holiday season, so they really quite something. However, getting back to my point, when you start that walk and you walk past, there's 60 different fraternities and one sorority house where you can get something to drink almost any time. 60 places you can get a drink or more. Then there are house parties that exist in the windows. And so my estimate when I've done this is that there's at least 60 other places that are parties that have big houses and things that are not fraternities and sororities in that same stretch. So within 2 blocks of campus, there's 120 places that are not regulated where you can drink. That's not counting bars because a lot of people are underage. Just the one irony where I live. No one with underage legal licenses can get into bars or buy alcohol. Then again, they don't really have to because they have 120 plus locations that they can do within 2 blocks of campus. All right? Contrast that with where can you buy an apple? And there are 3 places you can get an apple. If you want a beer, a lot of places. If you want an apple, you have to work for it. Okay? There's 2 convenience stores and McDonald's, and that's where you can get apples. That's it. Okay, we have grocery stores not within 2 blocks of the campus, but we have bars and we have facilities and a lot of different places for people, students to get this. Now, it's not just Penn State students that have access to this, because you might have friends of people that go to Penn State that you will visit on weekends, because that happens. And since we are the largest campus in the state of Pennsylvania, and if you count West Virginia, Ohio, and parts of New York, for a wide expanse, we're the place to go on weekends in terms of entertainment options. And so we always have friends and friends and friends come up to visit for various reasons. I estimated that on any given weekend night, we probably have close to 250,000 people that are between the ages of 18 and 23, walking those streets, attending those parties. 250,000, okay. Well, to put this in perspective, that's 5 Yankee stadiums worth of people within 2 blocks. It's about 3/4 of the room. A lot of people. It's like Mardi Gras every week. However, when you go away from those 2 streets and you go to the campus, it's amazing. Brilliance, opportunities, internships, all of the things you'd ever want and more. You can go to a school like that and you can have every dream that you want to achieve. There's no limits on what you can do. Just adjust how often you go to the campus on weekend nights, on weekends, and you can make a difference. All right. So, peer influences, elevated opportunities. It's a little different, but Penn State is no different than many universities throughout the country, because people call me up all the time and they say, we have a drinking problem on campus. Doesn't matter where it is. That's pretty much what people say. Here's the other piece. I've studied other campuses. I have colleagues. We do studies. We want to study. We don't just do Penn State because we don't really know if they're the same wall. We never really find differences. Students are students. 18-year-olds or 18-year-olds. 19-year-olds or 19-year-olds. There's nothing unique about the student who goes to Penn State, other than the fact that they've chosen to go to a slightly larger campus. What about small campuses, like Rhode Island College? Rhode Island College has their college bars too. There's just fewer of them, there's fewer students. So when they get bored, they just go across town to where the Brown is, or the University of Rhode Island, or whatever. And they go visit their friends. Or they go to Boston College, and I don't know. Boston's got to be one of the smartest places in the country. Like there's over 150 institutions within 3 miles. And I don't make that up. It's really, if you think about a think tank place, Boston should have solved every problem. And I'm a Yankee fan. I'm just going to put this out there. So I have some issues with that. So, anybody here go to school in Boston? Where?
At Wellesley.
Oh, yeah. Wellesley was one of our partner schools for a while. Where did you go?
That's it, right in Wellesley.
Yeah. Did you say Babson? Babson is one of our partner schools too. I understand that Babson is amazing for They literally are like chefs that like provide people food. It's only going to come at any time. So, all right, so elevated opportunities. Why do you drink? Increased willingness. They're willing to experience consequences as a result of the possible good times that alcohol brings. And then reduce social controls. When I say social controls, I'm talking about parents and adults. All right? There's a college which falls in Alley outside of an institution. This school made a 1 cup per person rule, so the students got creative and decided they can have big cups like that. And there's a dad coming to visit his kids when he comes up for college weekend. He too has a big cup because he don't want to get left out. Here's a mom doing cake stands at a party. Okay. My colleague Kim Mallett, who's an amazing scientist, looks at this and says, "That's a horrible picture. That is a really horrific picture. She's got pink pumps on. Come on." All right. But this is really true, and this experience is played out over and over again all across. These are, by the way, not Penn State ones, just so you know. We have more dignity. All right, so let's talk about brain development and self-regulation. Young people's brains are not fully developed. I'm sorry, that's it. Really, that's the news headline. Your brains are still developing until you're probably in your early to mid-20s, which means you're going to get smarter and you're going to get more experience. And what you do with that intelligence and experience will help change the world for us, for all of us. Okay? But I'm talking to you only because I'm really excited about what you do. So as you go on, you do great things. Send me an email. My email is teresa.jr or teresa@psu.edu. Those aren't going to change. Shoot me an email. Say, I came to your talk. Here's what I'm doing, and I love it, and blah, blah, blah. Just do that. Watch how fast I can. But brains aren't fully developed. And because they're not fully developed, there's 2 parts of the brain I want to talk about. There's a lot of parts, but I just want to mention this. One is the emotional center of the brain. Okay, I'm not going to quiz you on it, but it's the amygdala. It's the center that controls our emotions. When we feel things, happy, sad, angry, frustrated, whatever, it originates there. It's in the center of our brain. You don't control whether you feel things. You control what you do after you feel. I don't control what I feel. I control what I do afterwards. When somebody cuts me off and I'm driving, I feel something. But what I do afterwards is I go, idiot, up the horn, go, all right, whatever, you go first. You know, whatever that might be, right? So we control not what we feel, we control what we do after. Have you ever noticed that? That when you feel things, you don't get a choice. You get angry, you can't not get angry, but you can do something if you get angry. Or you get afraid. Right? When you get afraid, you can't really control. You already got afraid. Your heart went up, your breathing went up, your body reacted to it. Then what you do, it's up to you. So that's one really important part that is not fully developed. If I had to bet, which I'm not much of a gambling person, I'm a scientist, I would bet most of you make most of your choices initially based on how you feel about things. And what you do as an adult is you learn to try to let those feelings wash over you. What I teach my students is that if you feel something, do not reply to an email while you feel it. Wait 48 hours. If you still feel that way, hit send. But let the emotion wash. When I make somebody an offer to come and work with me and get trained to be a doctor at Penn State, I say, do not decide in the next 48 hours. Just realize you're a really good student, you're probably going to have other offers, wait for that emotion to go away. I'll give you a choice too, right? Any of you going to buy a house soon? Right? What? Come on now. Not doing Bitcoin? Anyway, who here's buying a house? Or buying something big? Making a big purchase decision soon. Anybody? Lord, come on. No, come on. But the thing is, you got to let it wash. So that's how people make decisions. Data show that younger people make most of their decisions based on how they feel. Adults make most of their decisions based upon thinking about it for a while. And that's why adults aren't really in a rush to make a decision. That's why when you go to your parents and say, I want to do this is going to be great, blah, 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 let me tell you about it. And they go, let's just think about this. And you're like, no, we got to do it now. Come on. By the way, that's how you will talk, right? That's your anxious voice. So that's it. The second part is what we call the frontal cortex, or this big part of our brain. That's where we think. So usually we feel before we think. In fact, if anything, we have to learn to feel and then come up with a goal. That's the big goal that we have over the next 10 years, to not just feel and do it. So if I go back to that first slide where everybody was drinking, that's a lot of feeling and not a lot of thinking. There wasn't a lot of thinking going on. When I say there's not a lot of thinking going on, most people weren't really thinking about how it affected their lives, how it affected their career choices, how it affected their families. They didn't think about those things. And one of the goals for most of the good interventions is to shift it from being emotional to being thoughtful. You make thoughtful decisions, it accelerates your maturity. And I used to think when I started teaching parents how to do things, what I was really doing was I was teaching parents how to communicate and talk to their kids. And what I realized along the way was I was teaching parents how to help change brain development. That's what I'm really doing. So let's go back. I want to have a map. I want to reach people, a big audience, with a brief thing, change the most, that kind of thing. What I'm really trying to do is change brain development maximum with the largest audience, with the least amount of time, and have the most impact on that brain development. So how long have I been talking for? About 30 minutes, because we had a little technical difficulty before we started. That's what I've been doing this whole time. Sharing with you things I know, so as that you think differently. That's what a goal of an intervention really is. Sharing with parents, sharing with students, sharing with doctors, sharing with professionals, sharing ideas. In your cases, you great people in the first, actually third row. Glad you're not the first row, because I was spinning in here. Not purposely. It's just like when you talk. Anyway, that would be what I would do, but I'm trying to change that. And that's what parents are really about. They're really thinking, like, when I'm doing this now, I'm hoping it helps you now, but I'm also hoping that it helps you going forward, right? And a parent's role is really about helping your kids be happy and healthy and safe. Happy, healthy, and safe. It's pretty straightforward. Walk out the door of your house, your parent's goal should be happy, healthy, and safe. Not necessarily they're not. There are times when they want to make you safe, but not happy, right? Because they might not do what you want them to do, but they're trying to make you safe. And if parents think about boil it down to that, that's usually what we're trying to do. That's our goal. And happy might be helping you achieve what you're passionate about. Not just making you happy. We're not in charge of making you happy, we're in charge of helping. So, all right. New directions. So this is what we've been studying for a while. We've made some shifts in our directions. I promise I'm not going to go too much longer, but I'm going to ask you to be patient with me for this because I think it's really worth it. And then we talk a little bit about the science. What I said earlier, my questions. We're interested in what does an emergent drinking problem look like when you're young? This is a really important question because I'm going to ask you to visualize what you think the drinking problem looks like when somebody's a little older, like maybe in their 30s or 40s. What do you visualize when I say a drinking problem? You see somebody's like having a difficult time with alcohol, or they might be slurring, and they're not responsible, or they're not, things just don't look right. What does it look like for a young person? You don't look like you're 40 years old, right? You're never really going to look. If you look like you're 40 years old, you're in trouble. Yeah, really. You don't look, right? You're laughing. They're like, I don't want to look like 4 years old. What's your name?
Thomas.
Thomas. Yeah, you know. I don't know. Now, actually, here's the difference. I actually want to look like I'm 40 years old. There's a switch in gears there. What does it look like when you're young? And then the next one, what can be done to disrupt the development of an emerging problem? And this is something new that we're trying to do now. We're trying to identify the drinking problem in its earliest possible phases, and what can we do to disrupt them? In other words, what I mean is, what can I do to help parents disrupt it? So I'm just going to jump on this because it is new, and I really want to share this. In fact, it's so new, no one else has heard me talk about this. People in my group, we talk about it a lot, but outside of my group, no one's out. You're the ones, you asked me to come out. Everybody else wants webinars. When you get personal, this is what you do. All right, so let's look at this picture here for a second. And I'm going to point this out. This is total consequences experience. So we looked at students across 4 years of college. And we looked at the total problems they had as a result of alcohol. So let's play a game. What do you think that number? I know this is right here, so ignore this information on the bottom. If you didn't look at that, what do you think the number would be? Total consequences experience because of alcohol in 4 years. Now, when I say that, I should define what's a consequence. Consequence is getting sick. Okay. Consequence is getting nauseous enough that you have a hard time standing up. Consequence is blacking out. And I'll define what blacking out is. Blacking out is where you cannot remember parts of an evening. Okay, it's not passing out, it's blacking out. Your brain's still active, but it changes its goal. It says, you don't really need memories anymore. So we're not going to form any over the next couple of hours. What you need is to breathe, and your heart needs to pump. Okay? So we're shifting all of our energy from memory formation and thinking and feeling to keeping you respirating and breathing, and your heart going. Because alcohol is a depressant. So the more alcohol you put in your body, the slower your heart beats, the less you breathe. And we need oxygen. And we need for our heart to beat. Because what the heart does when it beats is it takes nutrition through our body to the periphery in our organs, and it removes waste. If it doesn't beat, you get no nutrition and oxygen, and you get no removal waste, and then you get organ failure. So when you black out, and you can't remember what happened a little bit the night before, what's really going on is your brain saying, no more memories for you. Maybe tomorrow, but right now, not important. But here's the thing, you're still doing stuff. So you're like going and talking to people, and shaking hands and having a conversation, or kissing somebody you just met, or something like that, or punching somebody, and you don't remember any of it. I had this happen, not me personally. I had this happen for students, and I've had this with young people, where they get in a fight with a police officer while they're drinking, because they're not forming any memories and make really bad choices, and they get arrested, and the consequence is the same, whether they couldn't remember or not. I had a lawyer who worked on both sides of the fence, talk about sexual assaults. And he said, here's the advice I give to young people. If you meet somebody while you've been drinking, get their phone number and call them when you're sober. It's great advice, right? Talk to someone, hey, I'm you, you're me, we're chatting, this is great, all of a sudden we're making out. Then something happens, and the next day everybody regrets it, and we don't remember anything that we did that night. That's not good. This is the way we want to build any relationships with people. Meet someone you know, get a number, get some information, talk to them when they're sober. If you still have a spark, great, have a cup of coffee. Don't do it while you're drinking. It's a bad idea. Usually not good things come out of that experience. All right, so here's the number of consequences. So number, I was a little shocked at this, and I've asked people questions. So the numbers behind me, you went to school in Boston, so you probably know this. But what would you think the the typical number of consequences a student experiences across 4 years? Blacking out, vomiting, getting arguments, having problems. What would you think your number is? I'm thinking.
Well, I went to school in a dry town, so.
But what do you think the typical student experiences? The typical student who just started college last fall, after the pandemic sort of stopped and students went back to college, had 4 years ahead of them. What could they expect to experience in the next 4 years?
I guess I would have thought like half of it.
Half of what?
Well,
You see?
yeah.
I gave it away. Half of what? So what would be your number? Give me a number.
40.
40, thank you. So about 10 years. What do you think?
I would go differently. I figured in college, say once a month, someone gets in trouble.
So about 12 a year, 48. Okay. I never got near this. Yeah, what do you think? 80. Yeah. Well, actually, it's somewhere between 20 and 140. Somewhere between 20 and 140. And that's not the whole continuum. That's what's considered still average or normal or typical. 40, 20 to 140. That's just average kid, don't know anything about, so I know nothing about you today, even though I know you are here for a good reason. That's why I said, somewhere between 20, like 5 a year, to 140, and that would be considered typical. We have 45,000 students at Penn State. 12,000 are new students. Those 12,000, I would expect them to, if I didn't know anything about them, somewhere between 20 and 140. All right? 140. That's normal. So if somebody experiences 140, which is the equivalent of, what's 140 divided by 4? Rough.
Okay, on the spot,
Yeah,
yeah.
you are. Yeah, you're sitting in the 3rd row. You sit in the back, then I have to walk and ask your name. You know?
35?
Thank you. Good job. Sorry, so here's the deal, right? About 35 a year. We've learned, though, and it's consistent across that month, so whatever the high water mark is in that first year, it stays that way the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, unless something disrupts it. So that's what we learned. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that as a target, which is, okay, now I've got a target, I've got a goal. I want to reduce it. I don't want it to be 140. I want it to be less on average. So I want to know, what can I do to change that? First off, I want to change young people's perceptions of it's okay to experience consequences because all my friends are doing it. I want to reduce the willingness. That's the emotion. I'm willing to. That's the feeling. If it happened on the weekend, is that good or bad? If I'm willing to experience it, I'm like indifferent. I don't want people to be indifferent. I want them to say, I don't really want that to happen. And then the next thing is, I want to see that they start to regulate and make choices, regulate the emotions, right? If I can get them to regulate more, and I can get them to not be willing to experience as many problems due to drinking, I can change the total number. What's the most important influences on these two things? Parents. And I'll narrow it down even more. It's parents thinking it's okay that their kids drink when they get to college in the first year. It's parents that are willing to be lenient about the rules about drinking in their homes before they get to college. I'm going to talk more about that. I don't want to be judging. I want to listen to all parents, but these are what the data show. That as the approval goes up for young people to drink, even small amounts in controlled environments, self-regulation goes down. That's the brain development part. Willingness to experience consequences goes up, and then total consequences change. And if we measure how much parents' rules are in terms of allowing the kids to drink under special occasions that are even supervised, for every 1 unit increase in that, we notice the consequences go up by at least a factor of 10.
everyone else.
That's a really good question.
Europeans,
That-
levels,
that-
like,
I'm gonna repeat the question. Does this apply to Europe too? And that's a really good question. Your name is? Anna? Did I say that right? Cool. The answer is yeah. No. It's worsening. So it's, I said, yeah, it is, applies to Europe, but it's worse in Europe, because children in Europe start drinking at earlier ages. Yeah, I have really good colleagues and friends in Europe. Interestingly, you know, like here, when I first started, we called this the European model, right? And I did this symposium in Washington, D.C., with the Society for Prevention Research, and I brought people from around the world to talk about this. And the European people that I brought in said, can you stop referring to this as the European model? It really makes us look bad. Okay? And I was like, but it is the European model. We all call it the European model. We don't call it the European model. But it's actually worse. But we don't look at it and go, well, in Europe, kids drink with their parents and then. Yes, in 2 different countries, it's actually better than the US. Turkey and Italy. Okay, those are the 2 countries where the drinking problem rates are comparable or lower to the United States. In every single country other than those 2, it's higher. I think I have a slide here. But I thought the same thing. Right? I mean, many of us do, because it's so normal. But it turns out the reason why we're in every country with our parenting materials is because they come to us and say, we need your help. We have a really big drinking problem here in Finland, France, Switzerland, we name it, Spain, all right? Because it's normalized. Here's the other thing about it. And I'll share this later, I'll stick around for a bit. We don't really know how to teach our kids how to drink. All right? We made a lot of medical events. Think about it, ready? Everything's compared to we put a man on the moon. Right? We put a man on the moon. We actually have people living in space right now. We figured out how to do that. You know, we've never figured out a way to actually teach young people how to successfully drink. Because we don't have a single study showing any method that parents have used that's protective. And that too, Europe, Australia, US. There's not a single scientific paper that says, if you do it this way, your kids are lower risk. We have the opposite. And I wish we did. Trust me, it'd be a lot easier for me to come in and say, okay, here's the recipe. Do this. If you're going to have your kids drink, do these things. This would make it safe. We don't have those things. What we do have is when parents are trying their best to be protective of their kids by giving them access in small doses under supervised conditions so that they can feel the effects, they can learn how to drink like adults that are responsible, all the things we try to do to be protective. It doesn't translate. When you're not with your adults that are supervising, they drink more often, heavier, experience more consequences, are more likely to combine alcohol with other drugs. They're certainly more likely to combine different types of alcohol and drink faster, because we have data that we've done monitors like watches, where we can look at the patterns of drinking over time. And there's 2 things we care about. One is the peak amount of blood alcohol concentration, and what we call area under the curve. What it means is staying at a high blood alcohol concentration over time. So we're more likely to black out and do these problems. By the way, every time I talk about something negative, I hate to say this for you parents. Until about 31, 25, we've gone through the gauntlet. The thing that makes a difference is changing your approach. Instead of protecting them by letting them have access, because it's not protected, protecting them by discouraging them. And I said this earlier at lunch. Every year that you postpone initiation from the age of 13 on, it decreases the chance of having lifetime alcohol problems by 10 to 15 to 20%. So young people who start drinking between the ages of 13 and 15 have almost a 50% chance of having an alcohol problem, even in small doses in their lives. That's 1 out of 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 here. If you start drinking right now, and I give you alcohol in your controlled doses of your drink, 50% of you are going to have alcohol problems in your life. You'll have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol where you have difficulty controlling how much you drink, how often you drink, and so on. But here's the good news. All it takes, and it's really not that hard, is for parents to understand this. Some of this is new data. Like today, I'm talking, this has not been scientifically published, but it's under review, it's almost ready to be accepted. I figured it's time to release it here. But as your approval of drinking goes up, your kid's willingness to experience consequences will go up too, because that's just what happens. And regulation goes down, because that's what happens. And then the total number of consequences changes from 20 to 240 to more than that. So that's what the data shows. That's not my opinion. So as a parent, if I had this information when my kids were younger, I'd feel more empowered to help them. I didn't have this information. I had different information at the time, but I didn't have this. I'll skip ahead. Next one. How does tolerance change things? And tolerance is complicated because tolerance is related to behavior as well as genetics. Some people can tolerate alcohol very much, right? Controlling how much you drink and how you feel afterwards. Who here has low tolerance? You drink just a drink and you're just like, oh, no. Right? Wait, can I see your hands again? Your cheap dates, that's what it is. Okay? Well, doesn't take you much. So, a glass of wine, you can feel happy and good, right? But 2, and all of a sudden things change. So tolerance is interesting because people look at tolerance in sort of a negative way. Like if you can't tolerate your alcohol, you can't control your alcohol, you're more likely to be getting sick and having negative effects. And, kind of at a party, you're the person who needs to get babysat more than the person who can drink and get up the next day and go to work and have no problem. Right? We call it tolerance. Your body tolerates alcohol differently. So here's the deal. We don't really know what tolerance is, but we do know what tolerance does. And again, this is one of those studies that's coming out. Oops. That's my voice when the thing goes out of control. It sounds really bad, right? It's not really very nasty. So this is drinking in the first year. DDQ stands for daily drinking questionnaire, so it just assesses how many people drink people have. And as they drink more in the first year, by the time they get to the 4th year, they now have a degree of tolerance that's been built up from drinking for those 4 years. And so what happens? As tolerance increases and drinking increases, we notice that physical consequences like blacking out, feeling drunk, vomiting, and so on go down as tolerance is down. Right? So that sort of sounds good, right? Like you're not getting anxious, and you're not throwing up, and you're not blacking out, and you're not passing out, and you're getting up the next day and going to work or doing your school. Right? That seems like a good thing, right? So as tolerance goes up, the number of things in that way go down. Seems good. However, as tolerance goes up, so does dependency. Dependency meaning I need to drink more to have the same effect. All right, so who here raised their hand when I said who has low tolerance here? Okay, what's a drink or 2, and that's it? Now imagine you have to drink 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 and 10 to feel that way. Because your body's built with tolerance. So I'll break a news here for you. Alcohol is a drug. No shock. Drugs have both positive and negative effects. We call it side effects, right? So you take some drugs, you get side effects, not very good. Alcohol's like that too. The negative consequences are side effects. So what are the positive effects? Does anybody know? Do you know positive effects of alcohol? Can you think of any? relaxes you. Yeah, it lowers stress a little bit, right? What else? Anything positive? Makes you happy more? It doesn't merely make you happy, but it helps you interpret the feelings you have as happy, right? So, so what's happening, you're having a feeling, and because you're with friends and you're all laughing, you interpret it as, it makes me happy. If you're with enemies who want to hurt you, you might not look at it as making you happy, so they get there with the drinks and they're making you feel scared, or frustrated, angry. So what happens is, though, dependency goes up. So here's the thing, I'm at a tailgate, Penn State football game, I'm hanging out with my friends, and I'm sipping a beer, but I'm not really drinking. And the person standing next to me is on his eighth. And we're feeling the same thing. Something's wrong with that picture. Right? I'm drinking the beer, I haven't finished it. They're drinking their eighth, and we feel the same way I feel. So they have to get to like 10, 12, 15 to feel like what I feel like after the first one. That's a sign of dependency. They often drink more than they plan to, because they go in thinking, oh, I'll just have a few. But the few doesn't really have the effect. It doesn't reduce the stress. It doesn't make you happy. You can't interpret those feelings that way. It dulls your senses, so you have to kind of chase it a little bit, end up drinking more. So again, I'm on my second, and that's the cutoff. They're on their 14th or 15th, and they're still not having the effect. It's no longer fun, hasn't really reduced the stress, they're drinking more, they're needing more. Their body starts craving. What happens when their body starts craving? They don't feel the craving. Anyone want to guess? Okay, I have not picked on you. Is it okay if I ask you to guess?
I have no idea what these happen.
You don't have, you
I
can't
don't
pick?
drink.
Well, if you're craving it,
You have to
Can your
keep
body
craving it.
needs
It's a drug.
what's that?
It's a drug. You have to have it.
Right? So you feel kind of cruddy when you don't have it. How do you make that cruddiness go away? You drink it. So I finished my 2 beers, and I got up the next morning, and I cut my one. They didn't really feel good after the 10 or 15. They got up the next morning, and their body doesn't feel good. So what do they figure out they need to do? Have a drink. So they have a drink. Then they have a couple of them. All of a sudden now they're drinking through the day to maintain a neutral location in the body. So this is what dependency looks like. It looks like starting to lose control of where the drinking's going. But where did it start? It started with building up tolerance. So as you drink more, your tolerance grows. Here's the solution. Drink a little bit less, your tolerance goes away. Drink a little bit less, it reduces tolerance. And when it reduces tolerance, we now know it also is going to change your dependency symptoms. However, there is a point of no return. So once you develop that problem, you need treatment. So let's go back to this. Parental approval leads to willingness to experience consequences. It leads to lower self-regulation. Lower self-regulation leads to more problems. But lower self-regulation tends to lead to more drinking, which is not shown in this slide. And as the drinking goes up, the physical consequences can be reduced. But when they start getting reduced because of tolerance, it usually comes with dependency issues. What does a drinking problem look like in its early stages? When you're initially experiencing problems and they stop happening, and with that, you stop feeling the effects of low numbers of drinks and need more drinks to be able to feel anything. And then you start feeling crappy when you're not drinking, so that you need to drink to just neutralize how you feel. But this comes on so subtle for many young people, because around them, people are experiencing 20 or 140 consequences, so that when they're getting drunk and they're drinking like that, not other people are noticing it, because it seems like everybody's doing it, but not everybody's doing it. Who are the people that are most likely to be in that situation? I mentioned it earlier. The ones that start early. The ones that start earlier build up tolerance. When they build up tolerance, they drink more. And it starts creeping up. Same thing. At that point, parents are really helpful. If they just try to push the initiation of drinking further up in the age level. This all changes. So from 13 to 14 to 15 to 16 to 17, 18 to 19 and 20. Because around 19 or 20, it's 10%. And it's really about it. So why do we have a 21-year-old drinking age? There's a lot of reasons, but ultimately, at the end of the day, one of the reasons is that you start drinking later in life, you have less problems. If you don't start drinking, you have even less problems. I'm not advocating, by the way, for people not to drink ever, but I'm certainly advocating for people to try not to drink in the first 20 years, because the numbers are high enough that they're not working. And we're not even talking about the other effects of alcohol. We're not talking about cancer, we're not talking about immune system functioning, we're not talking about organ failures, we're not talking about any of that. We're just talking about the chance of having a problem in a bad relationship with alcohol. All right, so that's some of the new stuff. So, we have two different campuses. We have the one that we look at during the day, not on weekends. It looks like really young people thriving. Then we have the ones that look like on weekend evenings that go on. Which campus do we want? Well, usually it's related to brain regulation. Here, we have a lot of self-regulation, a lot of frontal cortex, less feelings. Here, much more feelings-based decision-making. Okay? Here, we have a lot of family influence. When I talk to kids, I ask 3 questions really quickly. First question is, what's your GPA? Because I want to know what you do in school and hard work. Bless you. Second question I ask is, what do you want to do? What's passion? What do you want to do when you grow up? How important is it to you? I want to know what makes you click. Third thing I ask is, tell me about your parents. Why do I want to know about your parents? Because I want to know whether they're being protective or not. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to try to do it. So this brief intervention I talked about for a while, this works. This is the disruptor. This is the thing that changes the rules. Why does it change the rules? Why does it work? Because it changes the way parents parent, so their kids develop self-regulatory skills. So their kids' brains develop. It's a clinical tool. It's been registered with the government as a clinical trial. And as you heard before, it's been endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Institute of Alcoholism, and the Surgical Damage Report as being one of the 2 most efficacious interventions for parents of young children. So here's a question. Remember how I said give me 5 minutes? How's it going? How's it going? Pretty good? Helpful? Cool. All right. The materials are brief, so they're meant for parents to be able to pick up, flip through, read sections, see what works best for their families, make their choices for what works for your relationship with your kid. All right? Now what we've learned is that the more parents read and the more they engage with the material and use that for the basis of their conversations, the stronger the effects are. The less they read, the less the effects are. And the way to think about this, and I'll use this example. Let's say you're going out, you're going to spend a day in the lake, and it's really hot, and it's really sunny. So you decide, I'm going to use sunscreen, right? Does that make sense? You're pretty fair, you got to use sunscreen.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the deal, right? But you go like this, I'm only going to put sunscreen on this one arm. What's going to happen? You're going to get burnt. Parents read 1 arm's worth. It's not going to have the same effect. Well, your arm will not be tan. The rest of you will be red, right? If you get a headache, what do? Take 2 Tylenol? Imagine taking a quarter of a Tylenol, seeing whether it works. So it's meant to be used. The more it's used, the better it works. But even small amounts can be used. We talked to parents about their use of the MAD materials at national level. Parents that read the materials and talked about 20 topics, they got the maximum effect. Parents that talked about 13 topics, they didn't. So the difference between a parent that is super effective and not, is just talking about these 6 different things. You'll want to know what's those 6 different things. It's not the 6 things, it's the 20 things, not those 6. So, when you get this, I recommend you. And that's based on my recommendation from the science. Does it work? Oh, these are feedback. You can look at this because we're recording it.
Thank you.
Does it work? And the answer is yes. The red bars are the students whose parents read the materials. The gray bars were the students whose parents didn't. And you notice no one's not drinking. And that's important because all drinking goes up from high school to college. People that were non-drinkers or really, really, really occasional light drinkers in high school become regular drinkers on the weekends. And people who are regular drinkers in high school drink heavier on the weekends and so on. It's a jumping point that we see nationally. Right? So, but the red bars are clinically to the point where if you have less than 2 drinks a night, around 2.5 drinks a night, not I'm talking about big drinks, I'm talking about like literally serving side drinks, you're in the safe number zone, relatively speaking. Same thing with heavy drinking, lower bars, red bars mean it had an effect on it. And this is in the fall and the spring for conversations that took place in the summer before. And by the way, that's not necessarily time that we're going to do the same. We look at consequences, we see less in the school, red bars are red and gray. We see fewer DUIs. We see less using other drugs. And so on. I just gave you this. We looked at 30 something consequences, same patterns. Does it work for differently for different families? Remember before I said it works for everybody? So this, by the way, I'll explain this. It's easier when I explain it. All right, here. This is for families that got the materials. This is for families that already have really, really strong communication practice in their home. This is the average number of drinks on a Saturday night for those kids and those families. So it really is a big impact if you regularly communicate and then you use these materials as a piece of your regular communications. Very well. Now, people are a little concerned. You mentioned concern. We're concerned about our kids, right? This is where you show, here's one way to release them. This is typical kids from high communicating families, still clinically safe numbers. And here's below average typical communication in families who just get materials, but they really don't talk a lot typically. Right? At no time do you get the materials and is it worse. It's always helpful, and it's always clinically helpful. Here's families that are really good communicators, like really above average, but they don't use the book. Look at the difference between them. This is when they use the materials, this is when they don't. So I might be one of those families. If I'm a pretty good communicator, and I talk to my kids all the time, let's say I use those materials, and I think my kids are going to be okay because we talk all the time. My kids would be probably in the 4+ drinks per Saturday night. If I use those materials, it drops way down. That's how we interpret this. And the same thing happens for typical kids, much higher than with and without, and for low communication, again, with and without. When we did this, and we found these findings were replicated, this is what put us in the Surgeon Journal's materials.
So are the materials just a guide on how to talk to your kids about alcohol?
There's different topics, so there's a section that just kind of enlightens us to what's really going on. Then there's a section on how to improve communications or initiate conversations. Then there's a section on how to reduce peer influences, and then there's the big section on how to talk about the different topics in alcohol. When I say big, the whole thing's 20 pages, 26 pages.
Look at it, go ahead.
That was so good. Except for the alcohol, but still, I mean, the point is, this is it. This is the ticket. Will it stop it entirely? No, but it will reduce it substantially. And the big part is if you combine this with delaying initiation onset, and this is something that's here, but I don't want to spend a lot of time looking at graphs. We compared families who talked a lot really well, who modeled good behavior, who monitored and checked in on the kids, with families that did those same things, communicated, modeled, monitored. the difference between the two sets of families. One said it was okay to drink in small amounts under parental supervision, and the other one said, no, give it a full weight. This is not the time to do it. We compared the best families in that one thing was the thing was different. The families that let their kids drink for protective reasons, that monitor them, I'll get to your question, say what's in there. Their kids were more likely to be in the highest rate of consequences. It's almost like this graph right here, where if you do everything right, but you don't have the guidance of the empirical scientific information, you're flipping the coin. It really matters. People ask me, what's the one most important thing I'd say? I'd say the one most important thing is these two things. Read these materials and use them for the God to drive those communications. And resist allowing it to drink because we haven't shown any evidence that's protective. But we've shown a lot of evidence that you really reduce the substantial potential for coma by doing the right. Thanks for that. What was your question?
I was wondering if there was a difference in the effectiveness of the intervention based on whether it was a male or female student. Is there a difference between boys and girls?
That's a really good question. By the way, what's your name? I did ask you, right? Yeah, it shows you it's my COVID brain. Sorry about that. Well, it's really true. I mean, it's you know, I'm used to watching everybody with masks on and not really thinking about them in names. So I apologize for that. You can call me anything you want. What's your name, buddy? Great questions. Yes and no. You know, it's kind of complicated with young women and everything else. You know, we've looked at it. We've looked at a lot of different things. So we've looked at, does it matter if you're male or female? Does it matter if the father talks or the mother talks? Does it matter if you're a step parent or a single parent? You know, we really tried to look at all these from the standpoint of really making a large difference. And we found differences on occasion, but we haven't found enough consistency to make recommendations to say, do it differently if you have a daughter or a son or someone. In fact, here's the thing. They used to be pretty consistent. The people who are going to get the most trouble usually are men, biological men. They're the ones who get the most trouble. They drink more, they're bigger. Tolerance is a real important dimension in terms of illness and so on. Here's what we looked at. And almost every scientist that does this has said the same thing. Women have creeped right up there. You were protective, you were healthy, you were safe, you did everything right, and you changed to be like us. And it hasn't helped you in any way, shape, or form. In fact, worse, increases your rates of cancer. So women who drink are much more likely to experience things like breast cancer, esophageal cancer, and so on. So it's unfortunate, you know, that that's the case, but you know, we'll recommend that there are lower numbers for drinks per week recommended for women because of the cancers. Does that help? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I have boys, so it's something I was concerned about. I always hear that it's, you know, that it's
Well, boys do
worse
experience more
rates.
consequence than average, but the difference between the two is shrunk over
So
the
the
years.
intervention is as effective.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In fact, if you have a good relationship with your son or daughter, it's going to be, you know, as you can see, you see stronger effects. What's your name?
Suzanne,
Suzanne.
how does parental alcohol use affect?
It does. It does. Not positive. And use. I could just say that, by the way. So sometimes I do studies because I'm a parent and I'm also a drinker, you know, like I socially drink. So I want to know. And I was so hoping I'd find that I really wanted to find that out. I was like, oh, yeah, I like a good margarita with my Mexican food. But it doesn't help. You know, but we all make choices based upon risk, right? And it doesn't count, it doesn't have as big an impact unless you start reaching to the point where you're starting to have problems with drinking. So we have done studies where we've looked at what puts you in the highest risk group of consequences. Okay, now I'm not talking about like some, I'm talking about 20% of the students that drink experience 60+% of the consequences. If you take the school and think about the 1 in 5 kids who drink, they experience more than half the consequences of the entire school. That's a lot. So what's the odds of being in that group? Well, if you have a father who's got alcohol problems, it's 5 times more likely to be in a high group than a low group. If you have a mother that's in that group, there's no significant difference. You're low in both cases. That doesn't even get to all the drink-point prohibition. If you're a really outstanding communicator, modeling good, healthy behavior with alcohol, and monitoring who your kids are, that you let them drink, it's almost equivalent to having alcohol. It's 4 times more. That's a pretty important fact from what we've seen. So in other words, we keep on seeing this triangulation of data saying, if you let your kids drink, here's what happens. If you let your kids drink, here's what happens. Even if it's protected and you want the best for them, you want to take them straight, you want to give them some experience, you want them to be honest with you, whatever it is the motivations to protect them, you keep seeing the same thing. And you don't see anything like it's helpful. Your kids, you thought that they were just regular students. When you let them drink, they became honor students afterward. Doesn't happen.
Have you found a certain sweet spot of age where the conversations, because you kept mentioning 13, right? But I assume you need to have those conversations before they get to that point.
No, we find actually it's never too late. We find that if parents adopt the healthier practices and communicate these and parent the values of I want to make sure you're okay, which I'm going to base that on what the data show, help you be okay. It's never too late. In fact, we follow kids for 4 years, and parents that changed later still have important strong effects in reducing that harm. And so that's the really cool part. And the thing is, if you think about this for a second, it makes sense. You're one of the most important things in this person's life. If your parents kind of aren't there, they're not present, they're not parenting, you lose that opportunity. But if you re-enter back in and you can build that trust and you can build that relationship, you can be effective as a person that cares. So,
When did you start talking to them?
we don't find any negative point. So like if you start today, great. If you start a week from now, you lost a week, but great. If you start 2 years from now, you could have talked to them for 2 years, but you still, if you talk to them 2 years from now, in other words, you can go back and fix things.
Age-wise.
Well, that's an interesting question, because to do those studies in a way, you have to follow kids from birth and see which age matters and things like that. They take 18 to 20 years for us to look at that. There's really good studies to do. Like, I really don't have that much career to be able to follow kids till I'm 82 years old, you know. So what we've learned, though, is that kids learn about this information really early. I have a colleague of mine in Australia, Bob Kinsey, and Emmanuel studied grocery shopping behavior of kids based upon parents. And so what he did was he said, here's the grocery cart, fill it up with what your parents bought. And kids that were really little, like 3 and 4 years old, would get alcohol off the shelf and say, this is mommy's food, you know, and things like that. So he didn't think that kids were paying attention. They were paying attention. So I would say early's not a bad idea. You know, anybody's pregnant, I'll talk to the kid in the morning and see if it works. We know it doesn't hurt.
I'm sure it's in the booklet, but when you talk about not giving approval, what is not giving approval as a tenant? Not to drink as late as possible, to not drink, like what is kind of...
Well, we all have rules in our home, right? We have rules. Like, if you let your kid have a couple of sips of alcohol, I didn't think this would matter, but the data shows that it does. If you let your kids have a couple of sips of your drink, or even that, like, the wolf fall, or stick your finger in and taste it, and that kind of stuff, you find out that matters. It's crazy. You would think it wouldn't, but it does. The data's out there. There's no studies that show it doesn't. It shows that they do. So one of the rules are, do your parents allow you to drink? What's the upper limit your parents think it's okay if you consume? Do your parents let you drink at home? Under supervised control situations? Do your parents let you drink on special occasions like holidays and celebrations and so on? Like even small ones. Those are the things that we measure to assess the effects of this approval thing. So we're looking at the different behaviors as opposed to any given one. But we've seen it with one or two, with like things like your parents allow you to drink food in small amounts. And what's the upper limit that parents let? If it's not zero, that means it's something. Then there's differences between, like, for example, do you allow your kids to go to a party where you know that they're thinking alcohol? Right? So there's different ways. I don't know if I answered that question really fully, because when we try to publish studies with single item clinical questions, we usually get pushback from reviewers saying, you really have to do a larger interview. And we say, well, we're doing brief intervention, so we'll also do brief assessment. So we're kind of like jibber-jabbering with reviewers that are colleagues. So I like to use the fewer items because it gives us very specific information. Like, if you do this, then it does that. But I don't get away with it as much as I like to. So I would say, given that, I can't make the recommendation for any of those behaviors. Because for many of those behaviors, we've seen the same effects. And usually they're highly correlated. So the parents that allow their kids to go to a party where alcohol is being served are more likely to let them drink at home. Like, can you envision a parent that says, yeah, you can't drink at our house, but go to a party where the keg is? You know, so usually the same parents that allow one allow another. And at different ages, they might allow a little sip, but then later on, you might have your own glass of wine, and later on, you just grab it out of the cooler if everyone's having. You know, so maybe developmentally at different points it shows itself. But we looked at that, and we've never seen benefit of any of those behaviors there. So that's a good question. What's your name?
Julia.
Thank you. It's a good question, but it's not something that we can necessarily be as diagnostic and specific about. So under the conditions of that, it's a risk which direction to go. I'm not really being helpful. In the book too, we don't cover that. And in the book, what I try to do is I try to say the science on this is evolving, and because the science is evolving, it's really up to you as the parent to make that decision of what you think is okay with the call. The next version of it won't happen. The next version will say, it's still up to you. You get to choose everything as a parent, but this is what the data shows. Choose one. So we're still operating a slightly earlier version of that. We make changes every 2 to 3 years as the science accumulates, but think of the last 2 years as just vacuum years. So there hasn't been, we're still using data from these other states, but we haven't really been able to collect the same data. There have been studies that show that more kids are drinking at home during COVID than ever before. And for those of us who have been following these trends, I thought it would be the opposite, but because you have kids at home and they don't have much peer pressure, not going to parties, you're actually helping them and protecting them more. But we're not seeing that. Jen Nance posted a paper in the Journal of Adolescence talking about that. And she's a colleague from the
Because all the parents were drinking.
They were. Drinking went up in the adults too during that time. Frequency and quantity.
So the concept of the protective exposure
Yeah.
is supposed to guard against like going off to college and going off a cliff and like, no controls, right? Do you not see that? Or is it just not at a level below, like it's.
Can you say that again? I want to
Like
repeat it back, but I also want to
Yeah.
hear the question, and I'd like
Yeah.
to repeat it to you.
That protective control or protective exposure
Yeah.
is supposed to protect
Oh,
kids.
allowing, like thinking it's protective, or
Yeah,
like
if
it's
you
not?
Yeah, is that they wouldn't then go to college and be in
Go on,
environments
right?
and go
Oh,
crazy and
all right.
yeah.
So I'm going to repeat the
Yes.
question. So the question was, that when parents try to be protected, something called try, because it's not protected, we're going to be here. They try to be protected by exposing them in a small amount, so they don't go off to college and be blind. Okay, that they're actually trying to do. But, so let's think about that for a moment. What would be a protective amount? Like maybe a small glass of wine? Protected? Okay. How would you protect them? No, I'm just trying to get, I'm trying to
I
get it
think
through.
the theory is that then.
No, I'm not asking you to think, I'm just trying,
Yeah.
let's think it through. So somebody has a small amount of
Yeah.
wine, because the worry is if they don't have that little sip of wine or the little bit, they'll go crazy next to
I don't hit them hard.
you, right? They'll go crazy next to you. So the kid that's sitting across from you, I'm gonna pick on you, you're the one. I haven't picked on you today. What's your name? Alex. Alex is Alex. Here he is. He's sitting in the third row. He's been a safe kid. That's why he's sitting in the third row. And all of a sudden, I give him a little bit of alcohol because I'm worried that Alex is going to go insane in his first year and drink. Now you've had that 2-3 sips of alcohol. What makes you think you won't go insane still? How did that 2-3 sips change any of that? Right? Here's how it changed it. Once I said it was okay to have those 2-3 sips, then I say it's okay for you to drink. And what happens if I say it's okay for you to drink? It's okay now. You have permission. You know all the stuff you learned about it being risky? Don't worry about that. You're going to go to college, and I want to protect you by giving you a couple sips. Because next year, you're going to be drinking like a fish. It doesn't work that way. The conceptualization of saying, here, have a little bit of what harms you so that you don't have harm later, why would that work? All right, so we go even further. Not sips. I'm going to get you really drunk so you learn how bad that is. Okay? Now you've gotten drunk. You might fear getting drunk more when you haven't been drunk. But if you're with me and you get drunk, I'm here to protect you. What happens when you get drunk when you're out with me? That's right. Parents sometimes tell me this, and I don't have any data, so I'm just going to spill it out. I like doing this because I know they're going to do it anyway. And so I'd rather they do it where I can watch them, and I can protect them. And the answer is, yes, you did it under that circumstance. You're going to move in the dorm with them? In the frat house too? You're going to go to the parties with them? You're going to follow around and protect them? You want to really protect them. The science says don't give them alcohol. That's the studies show that. You really want to protect them. There's no studies that show that giving them sips changes anything. And I think conceptually, it's hard to believe why it should. Some parents do get their kids a little drunk to say, see what this feels like? You don't want to feel this. But if they're not used to drinking, I'm going like this, blah, 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 because they might be slightly blacked out. Because it doesn't take much to black out. They might not really remember much of that. They might remember getting sick. But here's the thing. How many people here are social drinkers? And have had a little bit too much to drink in your life? At least one time? Did it stop you from doing it the next time? It might have, short-term effect. You're like, oh, if I did a lot, I'm not going to do it again, right? But it didn't stop you from drinking. And how many of you, just fair and honesty, had a little bit too much to drink and had a little bit too much to drink on another occasion? Fair and honesty. Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, conceptually, we want to be protected. I get it. When parents say, I'm going to take the mystery book, I say, take the mystery book when you're 20, when you're 21. Try to avoid it because we know for every year that they start earlier, they're further along this. You want to take the mystery away? Turn to them and say, here, here's the deal. I'm going to take the mystery away. I'm going to give you that 2 sips. Just let me give it to you now. Think of it as an investment in your future. Then I'm going to go back to you when you're 20 or 21. And by the way, I picked 20 because it's that age where your brain's, the difference is still there, but it's not much. And I go, you still want those 2 sips? Probably going to look at me and go, no. What am I doing the 2 sips thing with you for? I got stuff I have to do. Because once they reach that other age where it's not about willingness and emotion, now it's about thinking things through. You know, like it doesn't mean as much anymore. I've watched it throughout college. It doesn't look like it's as much fun as it sounds. The mystery is gone. Actually, the mystery is pretty much gone when you go to college. And their dorm, the person that's in your dorm throws over the floor. There's the mystery for me too. Again, if I knew how to do it, I would give you the phone. I swear, I wouldn't hold back. I'd say 2 shots of wild turkey, 2 beers, and a rum chaser. You know, give it to me. Go for it. I don't really know. I can tell you right now, if you do that, it won't work. But
But there's no science that says that up.
single publication that shows it's good. It shows that there's harm in a lot of different ways. Wouldn't your doctor, your pediatrician turn to you and say, oh, by the way, have you been drunk yet? You know, they're up to their tetanus, chickenpox, and the first intoxication. You're about 18, yeah, let's do it. I'll get the shots, literally and figuratively, and we'll fix it. They don't do that. Now, there is a couple of doctors that would say, yeah, we drank as kids, let them drink. It's not what the American Academy of Pediatrics would ever encourage you to do. Does your pediatrician ever talk about you having to drunk up your kids drunk?
I'm sure that you, yeah.
If they do, it would behoove you to say, can you show me the evidence where that works? I got interviewed for Time Magazine. The writer wanted to, no, it's not a problem. I kept the real one. The writer wanted to say it's okay for parents to drink because they do it in Europe and it works, even though the data in Europe shows that it doesn't work. So she said, I guess we have to agree and disagree. It's your opinion. I said, no, it's not. But I'm sorry. It's not my opinion. Like, these are the studies. I'm happy to show them. Interestingly, that part got cut out of the
I just want to thank you, because I have 11 kids from, I'm Joyce from Ram Council, and I watch them and I know how they are, and you had them in the palm of your hand. And
They're great.
It's really just a treasure for them. I thought, oh God, they're going to be bored, and I didn't know if the subject matter, and I'm so happy they came. And I appreciate how you cared for them, as well as that they learned about the power of the parents in their lives. And all that, so thank you. Really,
Real quick before everyone leaves, want to thank the Rand Council, Silverhill Hospital, Buchanan Department of Health and Human Services, other sponsors of ours, as part of the local prevention council that we're here this evening, the Hub, and Demas. So thank you to everybody who supported tonight, and thank you so much for being so generous